To get stronger in calisthenics, you need to train frequently. If you train once a week, it'll be almost impossible for you to provide your body with enough training stimulus for it to get much stronger. But on the flip side, if you train too frequently, your body won't be able to adapt to the training stimulus because you're not allowing it to recover. So finding the sweet spot is extremely important. But what is the sweet spot? That's what I'm going to discuss in this video. But first, let's go over the central tenet of training frequency, which says that you should train again when you're recovered enough to present another overload and you've not waited much longer thereafter. If this sounds like Chinese to you, don't worry. I'll divide the statement in two parts and decipher it for you. The first part, you should train again when you're recovered enough to present another overload, basically means that you should train again when you're recovered enough to beat your previous performance. Strength is built by progressively increasing the load, and if you're not able to do that because you're not recovered, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot by accumulating a ton of fatigue for not much stimulus. The second part, and you've not waited much longer thereafter, basically means that you should train right when you're recovered and not much later. If you're recovered but you still wait 2 days before working out just to be safe, you're slowing down your gains because you're simply pissing away time that could be spent getting stronger. To conclude, your training frequency completely depends on how fast you can recover. The faster you can recover, the more frequently you can train. But what does feeling recovered even mean? To understand this, let's talk about the four main SRA curves of strength training, or in other words, the four systems that are being disrupted when you work out: technique, hypertrophy, neural output for strength, and joint and connective tissue integrity. Technique recovers very fast, in a couple of hours. If you do a very light technique session, you can do it again in a couple of hours because it's simply not that fatiguing, which means that you can do it basically every day. An example of this would be a handstand for someone who can comfortably do a handstand. Hypertrophy, or your muscles, recover a bit slower, in 1 to 3 days. If you do a hypertrophy-focused session, your muscles will typically rebuild in 1 to 3 days, which is when you'll be ready to train them again. This means that hypertrophy work for the same muscle group should be done 2 to 6 times per week. Neural output for strength recovers even slower, in 2 to 7 days. If you do a hard strength session, it can take 2 to 7 days for your nerve system to fully recover, depending on how advanced you are and the exercise you're doing. If you're a beginner and you want to get stronger in pull-ups, it'll take 2 to 3 days for your nerve system to recover. But if you're an elite powerlifter and you want to get stronger in deadlifts, it can take up to 7 days for your nervous system to fully recover, since the exercise you're doing is so taxing and the load that you're lifting is so heavy. This means that strength work should be done 1 to 4 times per week. And lastly, your joints and connective tissues take the longest to recover, up to 14 days. However, the thing with this system is that it doesn't need to be fully recovered before we can train again. Otherwise, we'd be able to train only once every 2 weeks, and that would just be sad. We can train again once the previous systems are recovered. Just keep in mind that if you continuously train when your joints and connective tissues are under-recovered, they can become irritated after a while, which is when you should rest and let them recover fully. It probably won't take 2 weeks for them to recover, unless they're extremely beat up. In most cases, a week-long deload will do the job. Aside from your ability to recover, the main thing that dictates how frequently you can train is your per-session training volume. The more volume you do per session, the less frequently you can train. If you do 8 sets of heavy pull-ups per workout, you might be able to train only 2 times per week, but if you do 5 sets, you might be able to train 4 times per week. What this comparison shows you is that by doing less volume per workout but training more frequently, you'll be able to squeeze in more total training volume, 20 instead of 16 sets, because the workouts aren't as fatiguing. Also keep in mind that if you want to squeeze 8 heavy sets of pull-ups in a workout, the last few sets will be of much lower quality than the first ones due to fatigue. This means that by training 4 times per week, you'll not only be able to squeeze in more total training volume, but also get in more quality sets. This is why higher frequency training is better, at least in the short term. You're able to do more high quality sets, which results in faster progress. The only thing to keep in mind is that by doing more volume, your joints and connective tissues will give out much faster, making you deload more often. This isn't a downside. This is just a thing that you need to know so it doesn't catch you by surprise. Now let's talk about how you can figure out the right training frequency for you. There's 3 criteria that a training program needs to meet for its frequency to be most effective. The first is that it lets you do reasonable volumes. If a training program has you train so frequently that you can only do 2 sets per session, it's most likely a waste of your time. The second is that you don't have to deload too often. If you train so much that you have to deload every 2 weeks, you're not even getting any further. You're sprinting a kilometer, but for every 200 meters you sprint, you rest for a minute. Someone who's jogging and resting for a minute halfway will surely beat you while saving his body the injury risk from going so hard. And the third is the most obvious one. If you can have quality sessions back to back, you're on the right track. All strength training comes down to is being able to beat your last workout's performance workout after workout. If you're able to do that, you're basically golden, and any changes that you decide to make will be minor. The goal is to find a training frequency that lets you train for 3 to 5 weeks before deloading. Any more and you're just needlessly stretching out the mesocycle by not training hard enough, and any less and you're needlessly condensing your mesocycle by training too hard. Once you've found a training frequency that lets you train for 3 to 5 weeks without destroying your joints or connective tissues, you can experiment by increasing or decreasing the training frequency by 1 session per week. If you decide to increase the frequency, make sure to reduce the per session volume. If you did 5 sets twice per week, instead of doing 5 sets 3 times per week, do 3 sets 3 times per week. While you might be able to squeeze in a third session of 5 sets, you don't want to risk it because you might overreach 2 weeks later and conclude that it was because of the increased frequency, while it was actually just because you did 5 additional sets. If you feel like this isn't enough volume and you feel super recovered a couple of weeks in, you can increase the per session volume. On the other hand, if you decide to decrease the frequency, keep per session volumes the same. If you did 5 sets 3 times per week, do 5 sets twice per week. This is because you always want to err on the side of less at first. You can always add more volume, just like you can always pour more milk in a glass. But once you've poured in too much and everything's spilled out, you have to clean up the mess. After all, post-deload gains will be the clearest indicator of which training frequency works the best for you. If you get stronger after a mesocycle of training for 4 days a week instead of 3, it's quite obvious which frequency works better for you. Now let's talk about some general training frequency so you have some idea of where to start your hunt for the right frequency for you. For intermediates, the best hypertrophy training frequency is 2 to 4 times per week, and the best strength training frequency is 2 to 3 times per week. This means that if your goal is to build muscle, you can train the same movements 2 to 4 times per week in the 6 to 12 rep range. But if your goal is to get stronger, you can train the same movements 2 to 3 times per week in the 3 to 6 rep range. This is just a rough average. You might be the exception, so you have to experiment and find out what works for you. And finally, let's talk about some mistakes that people make training frequency-wise that are not so wise. The first is waiting for all systems to be recovered until you can train again. Sure, it's fine to wait for your nervous system to be fully recovered to train again, but if you also wait for your joints and connective tissues to be fully recovered, you might wait 1 or 2 weeks before training again, which is just too infrequent to produce the best gains. You don't need to be completely recovered to train hard again. You just need to be recovered enough to safely train hard again. The second is trying to work out as frequently as possible. Some people really get into this mindset that to get as strong as possible, they need to work out as much as possible, and I was also one of them. I can even remember how I was following one workout program that I found online, which consisted of 4 workouts per week, and I completed those 4 workouts every 5 days, thinking that I'm going to get stronger faster doing that. This is just as stupid as getting 9 women together and telling them to make a baby in a month. Some things in life just can't be rushed, and strength training is one of them. If your goal is to get stronger, you should find the frequency that leads to best possible gains, not to work out as frequently as possible just for the sake of it. The third is assuming that the same training frequency works for hypertrophy and strength training. The difference between the two is the intensity. Hypertrophy work for strength is mostly done in the 6 to 12 rep range, while strength work is mostly done in the 3 to 6 rep range. Strength work requires a lower training frequency because it's more intense, which means that while you could do 4 productive hypertrophy workouts per week, you might be able to do only 3 productive strength workouts per week. The fourth is assuming that the same training frequency is ideal for all movements. For example, your pulling muscles may recover much faster than your pushing muscles, meaning that you can train them more frequently, and the only way how you'll find this out is by experimenting. And the fifth is assuming that your current frequency is ideal and not experimenting with higher or lower frequencies. This is very straightforward. If you never experiment with higher or lower frequencies, you'll never find out to which frequency your body responds the best. So in this video, I'll give you a simplified summary of everything we just talked about, in case you got lost in all of this information. Firstly, training frequency completely depends on your ability to recover. The faster you can recover, the more frequently you can train. Secondly, your ability to recover largely depends on your per session training volume. The more volume you do per session, the less frequently you can train. Thirdly, a higher training frequency generally is better than a lower one because you'll be able to get more quality work done, but it's also tougher on your joints and connective tissues, so it'll also make you deload more often. Fourthly, if you're able to train for 3 to 5 weeks before deloading while also getting stronger and not beating your body up too much, you're in the golden frequency zone. And fifthly, the general training frequency for hypertrophy is 2 to 4 times per week, and for strength is 2 to 3 times per week. You can experiment with higher frequencies, just make sure not to overdo it with volume. I really hope that you found this video useful and that you now know how to discover the right frequency for you, because that's what this video is about. It's not about me telling you how often you should train, it's about me helping you understand how you can find the right frequency for you. If this video was helpful to you, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like, subscribe to my channel, and commenting down below any future video ideas that I should consider. You can also check the description for the best 9 bodyweight exercises for beginners and my Instagram, where I post my daily workouts and lifestyle in general. I still have some important concepts that I want to go over in the Strength Training 101 series, so stay tuned for more. And until then, have an awesome day. Peace!